The coffee still steamed when Officer Ethan Green stepped into Murphy's diner and spotted what he'd been craving: an excuse. A lone black man sat ramrod straight, immaculate clothes, sipping black coffee, minding himself, entirely unruffled. In a town where everybody knew everybody, strangers rang like bells. This particular stranger showed every Tuesday for 3 weeks, speaking little beyond thank yous to the waitress. Green approached with swagger, hand poised at his duty belt, authority rehearsed. "Got some ID, soldier boy?" The man turned slow, eyes cool and assessing, reached for his wallet without a word. Green couldn't know this quiet visitor held top clearance, commanded 2,500 personnel, and oversaw regional nuclear defense readiness. Before we start, if you believe stories can nudge minds and open hearts, you're in the right place. Subscribe and join a channel that raises voices that matter. Murphy's Diner brewed the same coffee for 45 years. The same cherry red stools hugged the chrome counter. The same checkerboard floor ran to the swinging kitchen door. The same scent of bacon and fresh coffee greeted everyone. Conversations stalled when strangers arrived. The waitress called everyone "honey." Clarissa Vasquez had worked mornings 8 years, long enough to know regulars by plate before they sat. Black coffee for Mr. Peterson, 2 over-easy wheat toast for Mrs. Chow, sweet tea and apple pie for 19-year-old Daniel Morris post-paper route. But the man at stool 7 had only 3 weeks' history, and Clarissa still didn't know him. He arrived each Tuesday at exactly 8:15, crisp slacks, buttoned down, sometimes a blue jacket, expensive-looking but understated, movements measured, eyes observant. He ordered black coffee in the daily special, paid cash, tipped precisely 20%, and thanked Clarissa with a faint southern lilt. Today was no different. Colonel Marcus Rake, though she didn't know, sat reading a folded regional paper. Patient. He'd learned the ritual on his first deployment 32 years ago: never drink coffee scalding if you might need to move. Habits from younger wars had kept him alive through 3 combat tours and missions that never became public. The diner hummed Tuesday's usual rhythm. Peterson grumbled over his crossword. Mrs. Chow held forth about her grandson's college plans. Daniel stacked tip money, plotting his afternoon. Rake soaked in the ordinary, grateful for a morning granting borrowed peace. No crisis briefings, no classified meetings, no choices rippling thousands of lives. Just decent coffee and a community's modest bustle. That shift in air arrived the moment Officer Ethan Green pushed through the door, uniform squared, attention like a blade. Green had 8+ years on the job, enough to cultivate the crouch of confidence that comes with a small-town badge. Mid-late 30s, once athletic build gone solid, uniform sharp, badge gleaming, demeanor tuned to remind everyone who commands. Conversations didn't stop so much as sag, voices lowered, eyes tracked. Not fear, exactly, more the wary stillness, learned around authority, that savors its muscle. Green's gaze swept the room, inventorying faces like clues for later leverage. Peterson, harmless crossword mode. Mrs. Chow, punctual and predictable post-ticket. Daniel, counting earnings, a curiosity. And at stool 7, the Tuesday stranger, planted like he belonged, as if comfort were his birthright in a place that distrusted outsiders. Green had clocked him 3 weeks earlier, patrolling past Murphy's. Something agitated him. Maybe the bearing, too assured for an outsider. Maybe the way the man noticed everything while pretending to read. Maybe simply the unbothered blackness. "Morning, Clarissa," Green called. Just enough command to make the purpose plain. "How's everything?" "Fine, Officer Green," she answered, polite but distant. She'd learned safer lanes with him. Helpful, not chatty, courteous, never familiar, guardrails always raised. Not social today, here on business. Green positioned himself behind Rake's stool, presence unmistakable. "Sir, I'm gonna need to see some identification." Rake finished his sentence, folded the paper precisely, then turned, unhurried, disciplined, and quietly authoritative. "Good morning, officer," Rake said evenly. "Is there a problem?" "Depends on you, soldier boy." Green's fingers drummed his radio case. You've been coming around for weeks. Nobody knows you. That raises questions in a town this size. Silence gathered. Pen stalled. Forks hovered. Daniel stared wide-eyed. Story already forming. Rake studied Green's face, the angle of chin, the practiced challenge, the brittle assumption that rank equals respect. He'd met this type before, in country, stateside, everywhere authority lives. Of course, Rake said, movements so controlled they looked choreographed. Though I'm curious, what statute compels me to identify myself while drinking coffee? Don't get clever. Green leaned closer, voice pitched for the room. We got reports of suspicious activity. You fit someone we need to talk to. Clarissa clenched the coffee pot handle. The most suspicious thing the man had done was ask for extra sugar once, with a head cold. But she recognized Green's eyes. Decision made. Pretext hunting. Rake offered his driver's license. Ordinary plastic. Nothing special beyond a county seat P.O. box. Green studied it with theater, reading aloud for maximum effect. Marcus Rake. Says you live in Millfield. That's a long drive for coffee, don't you think? I like the atmosphere, Rake replied. Quiet town, good coffee, friendly folks. Green smirked. Let me help you understand our friendly community. We look out for each other. We notice strangers, especially ones a little too interested in routines. I appreciate vigilance, Rake said, sliding his license away. Community awareness matters. The smirk slipped. Green had expected fluster or defiance, maybe fear. Instead, he met polite agreement, wrapped in a steadiness that suggested he was missing something. What line of work, Mr. Rake? Government service. What kind? The quiet kind. The sentence hung like a gauntlet. Green felt the room's eyes. This would end with him towering or shrinking. He chose volume to mask slipping control. Look here, I don't like riddles. I'm asking about your employment. Straight answer. Rake held his gaze, voice unchanged but firmer. Officer Green, I work for the Department of Defense. My duties are classified. I don't discuss them with unauthorized personnel. I've broken no laws, disturbed no peace, harmed no one. Green laughed, hollow and performative. Right, a secret agent in our little town. I'm here for coffee, Rake said. That steadiness unsettled Green. The badge wasn't bending the moment. Here's what happens, Green announced, voice rising. You're finishing, paying, and finding another Tuesday spot. We've got enough trouble without mysterious strangers with classified jobs and smart mouths. The diner held its breath. Clarissa's heartbeat thumped in her palms. Rake placed a 20 by his barely touched cup, more than due, his habit unchanging, and rose with measured grace. Thank you for the coffee, Clarissa. Have a good day. You too, sir, she whispered, throat tight with nerves and anger. Rake headed for the door. Green slid sideways, not quite blocking, but signaling unfinished business. One more thing, Mr. Rake, he called loudly. If I find you've lied, job, background, anything, you'll regret it. We don't tolerate troublemakers around here. Rake paused, turned back. The composure deepened, carrying quiet authority that made Green step back. Officer Green, he said, voice calm but heavy. I've served 30+ years where you'd need a map and a clearance to even pronounce. I've faced terrorists, cartels, and hostile states, been shot at by professionals, challenged by men wielding real power. What I've never done is let small bullies intimidate innocents or stain the uniform they wear. The silence was complete, chastening. I haven't lied to you. I don't intend trouble. I'll drink coffee here whenever I choose. He held Green's stare, then nodded to the room. Good day, everyone. The bell chimed as he left. Exhales followed like surf. Through the window, the Tuesday regulars watched him cross to a dark sedan, quietly expensive, government plates none had noticed. Green stood frozen, feeling dismissed by someone whose authority required no polish. The sensation was novel and deeply unpleasant. Well, Mr. Peterson muttered, setting down his pen, that was something. Mrs. Chow pushed her fork around cooling eggs, appetite gone. Daniel typed furiously, already composing the text that would ping across group threads before lunchtime gossip. Clarissa wiped the counter like a metronome, mind racing. Green straightened his uniform, squared his belt, attempted swagger's return. Like I said, he announced, voice thinner, we don't tolerate troublemakers. That guy's gonna be trouble. Confidence sounded like a costume. 20 minutes later, Green sat in his cruiser, typing a report framing the encounter as effective enforcement. Meanwhile, 40 miles away, Colonel Marcus Rake strode through Ravenford Military Base's checkpoint, guards saluting crisp, respect stark, against morning's indignity. Good morning, Colonel, the duty sergeant said as Rake approached headquarters. Captain Monroe's waiting in the briefing room. Quarterly readiness from the Pentagon, plus budget lines requiring approval. Thank you, sir, Rake said, mind shifting to duty, compartment sealing. Any urgent messages? Nothing that can't wait until after, sir, though General Morrison's office asked about the civilian liaison program. Rake nodded, heading to the briefing room where Captain Julia Monroe had files stacked like fortifications and precision. Morning, sir, Monroe said, standing. How was the coffee? It was their ritual. He stopped at Murphy's every Tuesday. She asked every Tuesday. Educational, Rake answered, settling. Remind me to review community relations protocols later this week, noted unpressed. She knew his moods after 3 years. Something in his tone said the coffee run wasn't simple. Schedule public affairs? Not yet. He opened a personnel evaluation requiring signature. Where are we on the quarterly assessment? They dove into the grind. Budgets, maintenance schedules, personnel actions, inter-installation coordination. The invisible structure that keeps a base breathing. Ravenford protected the northeastern seaboard, threat detection lattices civilians never see. Rake's command mattered. Radio silence to full roar, every layer requiring calm hands and honest accountability. Ravenford housed advanced radars, missile defense, hardened comms, an essential node in homeland security. The base powered the region economically, thousands of jobs, federal contracts, fortified infrastructure, none of which Officer Green, nor anyone downtown, knew about when they sneered. As Monroe briefed intelligence summaries, Rake's mind drifted back to Murphy's. Green's behavior wasn't mere small-town bias. It had the crisp cruelty of performance. Humiliate, intimidate, dominate. Rake had spent years countering men who confused power with purpose. Sir? Monroe tugged him back. Reschedule the Joint Chiefs liaison? No, keep it. He refocused, scanning regional threat matrices. Continue personnel updates. Yet a slice of his attention stayed with the diner, deciding whether Green's conduct merited response. By noon, the confrontation traveled the diner's grapevine. Stories grew flourishes, but stayed anchored. A cop hassled a quiet stranger. The stranger stayed dignified. Something about it promised unfinished business. Clarissa replayed Rake's words, hearing earned certainty. That tone, neither bragging nor bluff, felt lived in. After her shift, Clarissa went upstairs to her small apartment and did something rare. She opened her laptop and searched the name Marcus Rake. What she found complicated everything swiftly. Clarissa wasn't a web sleuth, but 30 minutes returned sparse, telling crumbs, defense press releases, citations in military journals, a handful of photos in full dress, ribbons enough for a parade. What screamed loudest was absence, no interviews, no personal profiles. For a man claiming government service, Rake's digital footprint was ghost-thin. The official photos showed authority settled in posture, but hid the mission. One result snagged her, Pentagon release 2 years prior. Colonel M. Rake, appointed commander, critical northeastern facility. No address, no mission specifics, language engineered to say almost nothing, which told her plenty. She leaned back, tea cooling, reconciling the Tuesday regular with the commander emerging on screen. Quiet customer who tipped exactly 20% wielded serious responsibility. Green's behavior now felt not just wrong, but dangerous. If Marcus Rake was who the crumbs implied, Green had humiliated a senior officer in a diner full of witnesses. Clarissa closed her laptop, stared at town lights with unease. Somewhere out there, Green was sliding through his evening routine, believing he'd reasserted order. He had no idea what match he'd just struck. 40 miles away, Rake's quarters reflected decades of moves, functional furniture, minimal keepsakes, organization like oxygen. He reviewed intelligence briefs with methodical attention that had kept him alive through deployments and earned him command of an installation stitched into national defense. Reports showed the usual pulse, monitored threats, updated protocols, readiness maintained, nothing urgent, everything essential, everything. Ravenford's 12,000 acres hid in plain sight among rolling hills and guarded forests. From the highway, fences and no trespassing signs. Unseen, complex radar arrays, interceptor batteries, and comm networks knitting into wider shields against unthinkable scenarios. The base housed roughly 2,500 service members, from fresh recruits to seasoned warrants. They operated billion-dollar systems, stood ready for invisible dangers, and followed orders sometimes routed straight from the Pentagon. Rake had earned their trust and kept it. His record brimmed with commendations, citations, efficiency reports ranking him near the top at his grade. None of those documents included a diner standoff. He opened a secure channel and messaged his two-star, requesting guidance on local law enforcement interaction. Local officer displayed inappropriate behavior during routine community engagement. No immediate security concerns. Situation may require attention. Details available upon request. Respectfully, Colonel M. Rake. The reply landed within 20 minutes. Fast for evening. Directive 7 Alpha, flagged for documentation. Directive 7 Alpha, a post-9/11 protocol, guards military-civilian relationships while protecting classified operations. Rarely invoked, always serious. Rake began drafting a report, language exact, stakes implicit, because once logged, the machine of oversight wakes and moves. On incident report, civilian law enforcement interaction, he typed. On 15th of November, approximately Aero 800 FEM hours, approached by Officer Ethan Green at Murphy's Diner, demanded identification without probable cause, statements suggesting racial bias, explicit threats if background proved inconsistent, measured, factual, unmistakably concerning. Conduct suggests harassment pattern, targeting outsiders, aggressive approach and threats risk operational exposure, continued interaction could draw attention to installation personnel. Behavior indicates professional deficiencies that could complicate coordination in emergencies. He appended summary personnel file, badge number, Ravenford's role, and recommended provisional mitigations. The report would trip an automatic review through military intelligence, federal liaison, and possibly congressional monitors of civil-mil relations. He submitted. The phone rang. Captain Monroe. Evening, sir. Unusual inquiries today. Public Affairs got 3 calls. 2 journalists, regional paper and a freelancer, asking about mill civil relations, and a woman calling herself a concerned citizen. All asked specifically whether we have anyone named Marcus Rake assigned. Did we give anything? Standard, no release. But the timing worries me. Someone had connected him to Ravenford within hours. Security concerns? Nothing immediate, but I alerted base security and requested enhanced monitoring. If someone's profiling personnel, we need to know who and why. Agreed. Brief security, intel, PAO tomorrow morning. Should we loop federal liaison? Monroe asked. That would escalate fast, bringing resources and sunlight. Not yet, Rake decided. Scope first, paperwork ready, if we need to move quickly. After hanging up, he watched the floodlit perimeter and moving patrols. Their security protects against external threats. It doesn't anticipate exposure generated by a hometown badge with an appetite for humiliation. A secure ping. General Morrison, again. Preliminary review. Immediate federal attention recommended. Maintain normal operations. Document further contacts. A second ping from an unfamiliar address. Colonel Rake, Agent Noel Park, Federal Bureau of Investigation, assigned to preliminary assessment, request secure comms at your convenience to discuss federal response options, time sensitive. It was barely 9, the wheel already turned. He scheduled a morning session. Quietly, he hoped Clarissa's curiosity wouldn't put her in anyone's crosshairs. Meanwhile, Officer Green kicked back at home, remote in hand, beer sweating, convinced he'd defended community order against presumptuous outsiders. On cable dramas, the system always works, the badge always wins. Green didn't realize investigators were already opening a file on his conduct, feeding his name into databases he didn't know existed, tracing patterns he thought buried forever. For 8 years, Green had gotten away with it. Euphemisms abounded: overzealous, proactive, order-maintaining. But folks on the rough end used plainer language: harassment, intimidation, abuse of power. His targets: outsiders, minorities, anyone lacking the town's protective social mesh. Stops without lawful basis, searches beyond constitutional limits, treatment crossing professional lines, wrapped in the confidence that the system would shield him. It often did. Formal complaints never stuck. Whispers accumulated. Risks were managed. His reputation remained effective. Chief Lionel Whitford had managed Green's excesses 5 years, counseling, retraining, shifting assignments, hoping to steer him. Whitford believed in community policing, constitutional guardrails, and protecting good officers from frivolous complaints. Balancing those values grew harder each season. Whitford also protected the department's standing, avoiding paperwork that might invite external scrutiny. But Green's problem wasn't ignorance. He knew proper procedure and followed it when watched. He enjoyed what the badge granted, and especially enjoyed flexing it downward. In a desk drawer, Whitford kept a private file. Unofficial, locked. Citizen complaints resolved informally. Peer observations, his own ride-along notes. The folder had weight. Inside was the story they'd all tried to keep from metastasizing into scandal. Maria Santiago, detained for suspicious behavior that meant waiting after a double shift for her ride. Jerome Williams, handcuffed and searched after basketball practice. Dae Kim, a Korean War veteran, cited for loitering while feeding pigeons on a bench. Those incidents were handled. Apologies, assurances, no admissions. The complaints closed, resolved. But others never reached paper, like the night 6 months earlier when Green stopped Rebecca Martinez, a social worker heading home late through a neighborhood not hers. Car looked suspicious. The stop escalated when Martinez asked for legal grounds to search. "Smart mouth," Green said, resting his hand on his weapon. "Smart mouth means guilty conscience. What are you hiding?" She recited rights, requested his badge number. Green yanked her door, pulled her out, shoved her against the car, searching for justification that wouldn't emerge. No contraband, just case files and a professional who knew the law. He wrote failure to comply, a charge designed to punish resistance. Martinez filed a complaint, requested dashcam footage, demanded a proper investigation. Whitford met her, promised thoroughness. Weeks later, she received a letter. No misconduct found, procedures followed, footage corrupted. An attorney advised uphill odds. She dropped it. Caution spread. Word moved fast. The message: lower your gaze. Say little, don't challenge Green. Similar warnings circulated in other communities he targeted. Kids took alternate routes home. Businesses serving diverse clients found themselves swimming in inspections and sudden minor violations. Green also retaliated against anyone who publicly challenged him, background irrelevant. Retired Principal Elaine Crawford asked for his badge number after witnessing rough treatment. Citations for small traffic matters found her repeatedly. Restaurant owner Thomas Rickard complained. Inspectors materialized with clipboards. Retaliation thrived on relationships. Green had friends on council controlling budgets, contacts in county offices controlling permits, prosecutors comfortable with his narratives, and judges deferential. Most crucial, he had colleagues reluctant to cross him and risk isolation. Officer Sarah Donnelly had 3 years in when she saw Green slam Jerome Williams to the ground and search him harshly, language ugly and racial. When the boy walked free, she voiced concerns privately. Green's tone turned patronizing, warning, cold. Maybe you missed something. He looked like a burglar casing houses. He had a ball and walked home from the gym. And you'd say the same if it were your house. Shifts worsened for Donnelly. Assignments soured. Invitations evaporated. She learned the cost of dissent. Eventually, she kept quiet, watching incidents accumulate but withholding reports. The silence became its own structure. Citizens stopped filing, officers stopped challenging, leaders chose caution. The architecture of complicity grew invisible and sturdy. Green cultivated leverage the way others collect stamps. He tracked who had messy teenagers, who hid marriage trouble, whose taxes were untidy, which officers had ghosts in personnel files. Information became currency. Favors accrued interest. Fear kept the ledger balanced. It worked until he misread his opponent. Green had become so accustomed to immunity that he'd lost the ability to recognize when he was outclassed. His network could not defend against federal authority enlivened by a colonel's typed, precise report. When Marcus Rake walked into Murphy's, Green saw another outsider to domesticate. He dusted off the usual playbook. He didn't understand that Rake operated in a jurisdiction where Green's reach ended and oversight started, fast, cold, bureaucratically relentless. Green went home, pleased with himself, convinced he'd maintained order. He didn't know investigators were already pulling his personnel file, locating prior contacts, drafting interview lists, and mapping the pattern he thought scattered. The arc of accountability had awakened. Mayor Frederick Cole had 12 years in the chair. Knowing small-town governance is more balancing act than grand design. Competing interests, thin budgets, and steady services, that's the job. He navigated county politics, state mandates, federal strings with pragmatic patience. What he'd never quantified was how completely their prosperity leaned on Ravenford Military Base 40 miles away. It wasn't just another installation, it was the economic heart. That lesson began the morning Agent Noel Park called his office, voice cool. Mr. Mayor, I'm informing you the FBI is assessing local law enforcement practices in your jurisdiction, triggered by an incident involving military personnel from Ravenford. Cole's stomach dropped. Never once had the Bureau rung him about his police department. I'm not sure which incident, he managed. Details. Not over the phone. We're reviewing multiple interactions involving Officer Ethan Green and community members, with special concern for impacts on federal installations and personnel. 15 minutes later, the call ended. Cole spent the morning asking staff for numbers, what the base truly meant. The figures stunned. Roughly $360 million annual regional impact. Families spending north of $90 million locally. Base procurement feeding another $50 million to area businesses and contractors. Then the knock-on effects. Federal money-hardened roads, reinforced power grids, upgraded telecoms for classified traffic, defense-adjacent firms clustered nearby paying taxes, hiring locals, smoothing volatility, property taxes from base-linked development, funded close to a third of the town's budget. Now Cole felt the call like a warning. If federal authorities judged local law enforcement harmful to base personnel, they had tools, restrict off-duty privileges, keep spending on base, even shift operations elsewhere. Any option would gut the town's finances. Chief Whitford, on line 2, his assistant said. Urgent. 20 minutes later, Cole sat in the chief's office. Green confronted a military officer yesterday, Whitford said. The officer filed a complaint. We've got federal attention crawling over everything now. What officer? Colonel Marcus Rake, Ravenford's commander. Green hassled him at Murphy's, demanded ID without cause, made statements that read racial, then threatened him. Now the Bureau wants access to personnel, complaints, discipline, training, everything. Also 6 months of dash cam. Cole leaned back, breath measured. How bad? Whitford's jaw set. He opened the drawer and placed the thick private folder on the desk. 43 questionable incidents over 6 years. Informally resolved, observed, counseled, moved. I never formalized most. Well, why not? I thought I could fix it internally, Whitford admitted, and I knew that federal involvement might crater the department's reputation and function. I was protecting us, or thought I was. Cole felt the floor tilt beneath careful politics. What's our exposure? Worst case, consent decree, federal oversight, mandatory retraining, civil rights suits stacking up, financially devastating, operationally smothering. Cole had seen big city decrees, expensive, grinding, endless. A small department could be swallowed whole by compliance. And Ravenford, unknown, but the Pentagon knows, installations avoid controversy, especially civil rights tangles. Consequences often cascade. Cole's phone buzzed. Reporters holding, county commissioners waiting, someone claiming to be a federal liaison. The circle widened with every ringtone echo. The media knows, Cole said, showing the screen. Already public, Whitford replied. Local posts last night, regional outlets this morning. Expect national eyes by evening. Cole pictured headlines. Each would bruise their brand, their budgets, their brittle equilibrium. What do we do? Damage control, Whitford said. Suspend Green pending investigation. Cooperate fully. Issue an apology. Enough? Probably not. Once outsiders examine a department, they find more than the spark. Given Green's record, there's plenty of tinder waiting. A knock. Agent Park on line 1, the assistant said. Needs both of you. They exchanged a look, and Cole punched speaker. Gentlemen, Agent Park said, clipped and courteous, we're opening a formal civil rights inquiry into your department's practices. It includes the incident with Colonel Rake and broader patterns identified during our preliminary review. We'll cooperate fully, Cole said. If mistakes were made, we'll address them. Appreciated, Park replied, but preliminary findings suggest more than isolated mistakes. We've already identified multiple Green incidents that suggest systemic violations. We also see evidence leadership knew of concerns, but failed to address them adequately. We tried to manage internally, Sherman Whitford said. Resources are limited. Park's tone stayed even. Constitutional rights don't scale with department size, she said. Our inquiry will determine whether your practices violated federal law and what remedies are required. She outlined scope, timeline, and consequences, then ended the call. The room felt smaller afterward. How do we tell counsel? Cole asked. Carefully and soon, Whitford said. 6 hours, and this leads every regional newscast. Driving to City Hall, Cole saw the town through new math. Shopping centers, signals, schools, funded by dollars Rake's base circulated. Every improvement had federal fingerprints, roads to military standard, power grid hardening, telecom upgrades, defense contractors' signs dotted office parks, families in base housing shopped and played in town. Everything depended on staying in Ravenford's good graces, suddenly fragile. Cole parked, exhaled, and squared his shoulders for meetings that would bruise careers and budgets. Somewhere across those rolling hills, Ravenford's lights burned steady, indifferent to politics, built to withstand storms far louder than a small-town scandal reaching crescendo. Inside, aides queued calls, drafted statements, scraped calendars. The room thrummed. Cole rehearsed language, accountability without confession, cooperation without surrender, empathy without admission. There's an art to crisis posture. He hoped it would buy days they suddenly needed. Reporters waited with questions already shaped. Council members sharpened grievances and defenses. Community groups drafted statements. And in living rooms, televisions flickered, telling a story of a uniform disgraced, and a community suddenly aware of its precarious prosperity. Meanwhile, Green scrolled social media, finding versions of himself he didn't recognize. Context missing, he told the living room air. He crafted a text to a friendly council member, asking for support. The reply came back measured, non-committal, almost distant. He shifted in his chair, annoyance curdling. Return to fundamentals, he thought. write reports carefully, be seen, be decisive. But he sensed the center moving, that quiet rebalancing when larger institutions notice a pattern and declare it intolerable finally. At Ravenford, Rake prepared for the morning's secure call with Agent Park. He pulled supporting documents, liaison protocols, training records, community engagement notes, everything they'd done to be good neighbors while guarding secrets that must remain unspoken. He'd long believed local partnerships matter, even for fortress-like missions, but partnerships require shared professionalism. When a badge becomes a cudgel, trust evaporates. And where trust fails, rules step in, cold and formal, to secure what must endure. Monroe pinged, slides updated, security posture strengthened, monitoring widened, talking points aligned. Rake scanned, annotated, trimmed. He disliked theater, preferred substance. Tomorrow wouldn't be theater, it would be procedure, and procedure done correctly is its own indomitable story. In town, Clarissa stared at her ceiling fan, the day replaying. She worried about becoming a footnote in the wrong narrative. She decided finally to write down precisely what she'd witnessed, to anchor truth before rumors multiplied. She dated her notes, logged times as best memory allowed, included exact phrases. It felt small but necessary, the civilian equivalent of a chain of custody. Facts, once secured, can resist pressure longer than unmoored feelings and fear. Daniel drafted a post he never published, then deleted screenshots he'd taken of half-formed rumors. He thought about stories he'd tell someday, and how histories can be accidental knives if wielded without care. He closed his laptop uneasy. Mrs. Chow called her daughter, voice tight. It wasn't just rude, it felt dangerous. Mr. Peterson, finally finishing his crossword, penciled in a word he'd avoided. Consequence. Across neighborhoods, people chose sides, often without realizing they were choosing at all. The county's talk radio teased the story. A nightly host promised the truth they won't tell you. Advertisers clung tight, nervous yet hungry. Outrage is a business model, profitable in the short term, ruinous if you live where headlines land. Morning approached like a verdict. Cole's staff booked a press conference. Whitford drafted Green's suspension paperwork. Agent Park's team arranged interviews. Rake set 2 alarms, though he always woke 5 minutes early, habit drilled in by decades of deployments. The town slept poorly, if at all. Some dreamed of lawsuits, others dreamed of budgets. A few dreamed of apologies. Most dreamed of waking up and finding none of this had happened. Tomorrow would say whether denial survived sunlight. On television, a regional anchor smiled sadly into the camera. A developing story out of Brookvale, she said. Questions about policing, power, and a nearby military base's response. The Chiron's verbs tightened. The image cut to Murphy's faded awning. A reporter stood where Rake had, describing steam, stools, and a too familiar kind of conversation. Clarissa, unnamed and unseen, watched from her couch, hearing murmurs from the kitchen window, where her town's lights still glowed ordinary and stubborn. At Ravenford, Rake logged into the secure line. Agent Park appeared, professional, steady, economical, with words. They discussed timelines, points of contact, interview protocols, document requests, and the perimeter between necessary transparency and operational secrecy that must never be crossed. They agreed, maintain normal operations, escalate documentation, coordinate public affairs messaging, limit discretionary off-base appearances temporarily, and preserve chain-of-command communications. Rake signed postures he'd hoped never to need with a neighbor, protections designed to outlast someone's brittle ego. When the call ended, he stood looking at the airfield lights. Planes come and go, he thought, but missions persist. You build institutions to withstand weather, meteorological, political, human. This storm wasn't the worst he'd seen. It would pass too, but not without cost. Communities pay when trust is squandered, and rebuilding is slower than breaking. He rubbed tired eyes, then moved back to the desk. There were readiness numbers to sign, parts orders to approve, billets to adjust. In town, Cole rehearsed the statement once more, to acknowledge without inflaming, to commit without cornering himself, to promise process rather than outcomes. The camera doesn't forgive vagueness, neither does a community watching its reflection tremble on live television. Whitford arrived early, tie too tight, pen forgotten, shoulders heavy. He carried the folder he'd hoped never to show, the one that measured his failure to act loudly enough, soon enough, on what he'd known in his gut. The podium felt taller than usual. Microphones bristled like nettles. Cole stepped up, cleared his throat, and began. Good morning. Our town believes in safety and fairness. Yesterday, we learned of concerns that demand our attention and our cooperation. He laid out the steps. Cooperation with federal investigators, temporary suspension of Officer Green, a commitment to review policy and training, and a pledge to listen. Reporters shouted questions. He held the line, then ceded the mic to Whitford. Whitford's voice was gravel. I've served this department decades. We've done much right, but we must own where we've fallen short. Questions came hard. How long? How many? Who knew? He answered carefully, braced for pain that accountability requires. Back at Ravenford, Public Affairs published a brief. The base supports lawful investigations, values strong community partnerships, and remains focused on mission readiness. No names, no drama, just the institutional voice of a place designed to speak with restraint. Green watched the press conference from his couch, jaw set. He texted a group chat of colleagues. Witch hunt. 3 dots appeared, vanished, returned. Replies were cautious. He felt the space widen between him and people he'd assumed forever. His phone buzzed. A notice to appear for an internal interview. Bring duty logs. Submit devices for imaging. He stared, thinking of texts he shouldn't have sent, jokes he should never have made, favors he'd traded like currency for years. Meanwhile, Clarissa finished a second set of notes, time-stamped and signed. She placed them in an envelope labeled for counsel, just in case. Ordinary people rarely plan for subpoenas, but she'd seen enough to know today wasn't ordinary. Daniel biked to school under a sky pretending everything was normal. His friends asked questions he couldn't answer. He realized what felt cinematic in the moment becomes messy when it touches calendars, jobs, rent, and grades. Reality disenchants quickly. By evening, national cable folded the story into a panel. Pundits argued abstractions, and abstractions argued back. Somewhere between slogans and scrolling chyrons lived a diner, a waitress's notes, a mayor's math, a chief's folder, and a colonel's report. Agent Park's email arrived with schedules. Interviews began tomorrow. Citizens first, officers next, leadership last. She knew patterns hide in sequences. She'd built careers reading the seams between incompatible recollections. Greed leaves fingerprints, so does disdain, so does fear. Rake's final task of the night was dull and important, sign-offs that kept systems humming. He preferred tangible maintenance to intangible controversy. Metal and circuits obey physics. People obey incentives, and only sometimes. His pen scratched on, unromantic, steady. Cole walked home through a town that looked unchanged and wasn't. Storefronts still glowed, kids still skateboarded, a dog barked at a bicycle. He felt the way you do before a storm, the air buzzing, the streets pretending calm. Whitford returned to his office, sat, and opened the drawer again. He read each page, names and dates like stones in his throat. He closed the folder gently, as if it could break, or he could, or both. At home, Green drafted a statement and deleted it. He needed a story, but facts had started stacking. He told himself he'd fought for order, but order obtained through fear is only quiet, never peace, never safety, never durable. Clarissa brewed tea she barely sipped. She texted her mother, then erased most of it. She wanted to write, "I'm scared," and instead wrote, "Long day, I'll call tomorrow." People conceal truths to spare worry, and themselves, reflexively. On base, Monroe sent a final update, nothing more to report. "Thank you," Rake wrote back. "Get some sleep." He shut down the screen, stood in the dark, and listened to Ravenford's hum, the sound of systems designed to endure. Morning would push everything forward, Interviews, statements, leaks, blame, recalibration. Time is a machine that never pauses, and institutions either adapt or splinter. Rake believed in adaptation, deliberate, principled, unsentimental. You do what must be done, then you keep going. Green lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the exchange. He wished he'd kept his voice lower, his words different, his posture less performative. He pictured the government plates he'd missed. Details are tiny hinges for enormous doors. The townspeople slept in fits, metabolizing a new reality. Trust had been dinged, denial had cracked. Tomorrow, they'd discover whether leadership would sand the damage or replace the beam. Repairs cost money, they always do. So does neglect. Agent Park's team reviewed interview guides, checked batteries, confirmed chain of custody protocols. Bureaucracy sounds dull until you need it to hold. Guardrails are built before the curve, not after the skid. Procedure is how institutions remember what hurts them. At dawn, Murphy's diner prepped griddles and polished mugs. Clarissa tied her apron, palms cool now. She wasn't ready for microphones, but she was ready for coffee. People still needed breakfast, even when their world leaned awkwardly sideways. Rake laced his boots with practiced speed, the cadence of someone who's responded to alarms worldwide. He checked his calendar, security, intel, PAO, then Agent Park. He welcomed the sequence. If you can't control outcomes, control your starts. Cole rehearsed 3 phrases he could live with, 2 he couldn't, and 1 that might save them a lawsuit. Words matter, but tone matters more. People can smell spin. They forgive contrition faster than excuses, and faster still than silence. Whitford stared at the suspension paperwork like it had teeth. He signed anyway. Leadership sometimes means admitting you waited too long. He told himself he'd do the next hard thing quicker. He hoped he wouldn't have to learn again. The council group chat pinged. Half the members wanted immediate firings. The other half wanted due process measured in months. Cole typed, "Both can be true." It read like equivocation, but it was also the only honest sentence possible. Green's doorbell rang once, an early courier. He signed for a packet, notice of administrative leave, acknowledgement requirements, instructions for surrendering equipment. He looked at his reflection in the glass and didn't recognize the man who'd loved the badge. Clarissa served Peterson his coffee. He didn't look up from the crossword. "What's a 9-letter word for turning point?" he asked. She thought. "Reckoning," she said. He penciled letters, nodded, and finally met her eyes. "Yep," he murmured. "That fits." Daniel stacked silverware and decided to keep his head down when cameras came. He liked stories, but not when they could splash back on his scholarship recommendations. He learned a lesson adults often forget. Attention is a tax, not treasure. Agent Park parked 2 blocks from the station, preferring a quiet walk to a noisy entrance. She'd learned to move like she wasn't the story. Investigators should be gravity, not lightning. Inescapable, steady, barely visible until the falling starts. Rake stepped into the secure room. The screen glowed. He joined the call. Formalities were brief. They moved to facts. He provided dates, names, times, and the narrow band between personal affront and operational risk where federal interest spikes. He didn't dramatize. He didn't minimize. He gave the Bureau what it needed and nothing it didn't. That's how security survives. Truth, scoped and timed, shared with people who've proven they can carry weight without dropping it. The town's first headlines printed while eggs sizzled at Murphy's. The words would circulate faster than hash browns. Some would read them like confirmation, others like accusation. Most would read them and still need to clock in on time. And the day would keep moving, as days do, through interviews and statements, through shakier smiles and careful phrases, toward a future where Ravenford still hummed and Murphy's still poured coffee, assuming trust could be rebuilt plank by plank, carefully, publicly. Cole turned onto Main, noticing anew the shopping center, funded by defense-adjacent taxes, the hardened traffic signals, the modern school serving base families. He saw the quiet arithmetic of dependence, and finally fully understood what had always underwritten their comfort. Prosperity, stability, the very backbone of their town's success hinged on staying aligned with Ravenford base and federal overseers. Now all of it teetered because one officer hassled the wrong man over coffee. Cole parked staring at Town Hall, where 13 years of work had chased lasting good. Within hours, he'd convene an emergency council, explaining how one cop's misconduct endangered everything they'd struggled to build. First, he had to tell 8,000 neighbors their livelihoods hung by a thread, all because Ethan Green never learned the difference between authority and respect. Irony stung. The quiet stranger wielded more consequential power than everyone local combined. With one secure call, Colonel Marcus Rake could trigger federal actions reshaping budgets, governance, and futures beyond anything elections might accomplish. Green picked the wrong fight. Now the town, not just the instigator, would bear costs. Officer Ethan Green believed persistence was a virtue. Nearly 9 years taught him steady pressure made people comply or slip, gifting him lawful pretexts. It worked, until he met a different kind of problem: Rake. 3 days after Murphy's, Rake didn't disappear. He kept his Tuesday ritual, same stool, paper, breakfast, tipping Clarissa generously. Green saw provocation, Rake saw purposeful presence, observation, consistency, and leverage disguised as routine coffee. Where Green read defiance, Rake practiced intelligence gathering. Continued visibility wasn't disrespect, it was documentation. 30-plus years taught Rake that patience wins and information is currency, especially when a bully inevitably escalates after initial intimidation fails. Every interaction flowed into a secure log. Witnesses named, time-stamped. Deviations from proper procedure recorded with clinical precision, built to survive scrutiny. Rake understood. Conquer an adversary by mapping weaknesses, chiefly Green's impulse control when challenged. The first escalation came Thursday evening. Leaving the library, after 2 hours reading local history and municipal structure, Rake saw Green's cruiser crawl the lot, spotlight lingering on his sedan before the officer stepped out, posture rehearsed. "Evening, Mr. Rake," Green said, polite tone with an edge. "Spending lots of time at our library." "Evening, officer," Rake answered, walking. "Local history interests me. Your town's heritage is fascinating." Green fell alongside, matching his stride. "Odd funny thing," Green said. "Librarian mentioned your questions. Council, police organization. Makes a guy wonder what kind of research you're actually doing." At the car, Rake turned, meeting Green's stare without blinking, voice measured, unhurried. "I'm studying the community I help protect," Rake said. "Understanding governance and leadership is part of my job." Protect from what? National security threats. True, simple, and designed to remind Green his jurisdiction wasn't the largest authority. Green's jaw tightened. "Been thinking about your story. Classified duties, national security. Sounds like something people say when they don't want questions about their real business." Rake held still. "What business is that?" "Say it plainly." "Trafficking? Money laundering? Maybe scouting for crews?" Green fished, hoping for tells he could exploit. He'd thrown wild accusations before, watching fear betray people. Rake didn't oblige. The response landed with practiced clarity and legal edge. "Officer Green," Rake said, authority emerging, "you're conducting an interview without reasonable suspicion, making baseless accusations, and building a harassment pattern actionable under federal law. I strongly recommend reconsidering your approach." "Is that a threat?" Green snapped. "I'm explaining legal consequences," Rake said. "Different thing." Green stepped closer, using presence the way he always had. "I don't need lessons from someone likely running product through our town." Rake didn't yield or raise his voice. He lifted his phone chest high, camera framed. "Officer Ethan Green, badge 7749. At approximately 1945, November 18th, library lot. You accused me of trafficking without cause. This recording memorializes the encounter for appropriate authorities." The red light blinked. Green stared, the permanence unsettling. For the first time, he felt off balance. "Turn that off," he ordered. "No." The refusal cracked something fundamental. 8+ years without hearing that word so calmly, so confidently. I said, "Turn it off. You're interfering with an investigation." "There is no investigation," Rake replied. "No probable cause, no articulable suspicion, only harassment now documented." Green's hand drifted toward his belt. Cuffs, baton, or worse. Any unlawful detention or search will trigger federal intervention on a scale you can't imagine, Rake said, tone factual, not theatrical. The certainty made Green hesitate, like seeing a cliff's edge only after stepping forward. Then anger reasserted itself, partnered with his habitual faith in impunity. "Get in your car and leave," Green ordered. "Return here asking city government questions. I'll consider it suspicious and escalate." Rake stopped recording, pocketed the phone deliberately. "I'll return whenever I choose," Rake said. "It's a taxpayer-funded public space. Your suggestion that my presence is suspicious is evidence of discriminatory enforcement violating my constitutional rights." He entered his sedan and drove away, composed. Green watched the tail lights, feeling diminished. He'd planned to frighten Rake off, at least from places that made him uncomfortable. Instead, he'd been managed by someone who grasped legal and political leverage far better than he did. Within an hour, Rake uploaded the clip and detailed write-up to a secure federal system. At 11:30, Agent Noel Park reviewed the recording, noting Green's escalation, false allegations, and retaliation threats, then flagged it for immediate action recommendations. "Subject continues harassment despite notice of federal review," Rake summarized. "Tonight included fabricated trafficking allegation, intimidation attempts, and threats for exercising rights. Recommend rapid intervention before volatility increases." Park listened twice, underlining phrases prosecutors love. Green's pseudo-accusation mattered not merely because it was false, but because it showed a willingness to invent crimes to justify pressure. By Friday morning, Park's briefing file bulged. Witnesses, video, internal paperwork, 6+ years of pattern. What began as one complaint had grown into a case study in systematic violations. Yet Green wasn't done. Friday afternoon, Captain Julia Monroe called Rake from Ravenford Security. A local officer had contacted base, claiming criminal intel regarding personnel. "What kind?" Rake asked. "He alleges you're laundering money and trafficking, requests access to personnel files and footage. You provided nothing." "Of course not. We referred him to federal channels. But, sir, this is a significant escalation." Rake recognized the line crossed, from personal harassment to interference with military operations. Attempting to breach classified facilities through false pretenses isn't merely misconduct. It edges toward federal crimes. "Prepare a base-wide security bulletin," he ordered. "Advise personnel of potential improper contact by local officers. Report any such approach immediately." "Should we recommend avoiding off-base activities?" Monroe asked. That was the dangerous domino. Families retreating, businesses bleeding. "Not yet," he said. "Draft contingencies." That evening, Green made his worst mistake. Rake was dining when Green entered with Officer Sarah Donnelly, the colleague who'd learned long ago silence was survival. After speaking to the hostess, Green strode to Rake's table, voice pitched. "Mr. Rake, step outside. Questions about your activities." Rake considered the stage. 2 uniforms, a full room, public intimidation. "I'm eating. If you have official business, coordinate through federal channels for a lawful interview," he said. "Federal authorities?" Green laughed. "I checked your defense story. No Marcus Rake in their database." Both knew he was lying. Classified personnel aren't visible to municipal cops. But sowing doubt before an audience served Green's theater. "Oh, officer," Rake said, letting the room hear, "you're asserting access to records you cannot lawfully view and attempting public detention without cause. That's unlawful harassment." Green grinned tightly. Investigating a liar misrepresenting himself in our town. Rake stood, set cash for his meal, and leveled a gaze that made hostile officials reconsider before. You're interfering with a federal officer's duties, spreading false statements, and discriminating before witnesses who'll testify in your civil rights case. Silence landed. Even Green faltered. You're not federal, he said, confidence fraying. Rake produced a leather case, credentials open. Green's face paled at the seals, signatures, and language that left little room for bravado or denial. Colonel Marcus Rake, United States Army, Commanding Officer, Ravenford Defense Installation, top secret clearance. I'm leaving. Detain, search, or impede me, and you'll face charges that end your career and likely bring criminal consequences, Rake said, calm, conclusive. He exited steady as ever. Green stood immobilized, under 100 eyes, waiting to see if the badge would assert power or display wisdom. Donnelly touched his sleeve. Ethan, we should go. He swallowed, fury fighting fear. He didn't follow. Damage already spread. Within an hour, diners called friends describing everything. By morning, everyone would know the quiet regular was Ravenford's commander. By Monday, evidence would reach critical mass against Green's protective machine. The escalation phase finished, reckoning cued. Agent Park, 12-plus years deep in civil rights work, recognized when cases outgrow misconduct and become systemic abuse demanding federal intervention. The Green file crossed that line days earlier. At the field office, she briefed FBI agents, DOJ attorneys, and military liaisons. Subject, Officer Ethan Green, Badge 7749, Municipal Department, nearly 9 years. Initial complaint by Colonel Marcus Rake documents harassment pattern and civil rights violations. Slide by slide, she stacked incidents, statements, corroborations, methodical, undeniable. We've identified 49 events across 6 years, unlawful stops, baseless searches, retaliatory arrests, intimidation, she said. DOJ attorney Rebecca Chen leaned forward, pen poised. Department's prior response? Chen asked. That's the fulcrum, Park said. Chief Lionel Whitford tracked concerns privately for 5 years, never escalated, rarely disciplined, managing internally. Result, prolonged constitutional violations. The room's temperature seemed to drop. Navy Commander David Torres, military liaison, raised a hand. Specific risks to base operations? Park displayed Green's attempts to access protected data and badger personnel. He fabricated claims about the commander and sought unauthorized records, she said. How serious? Potentially significant, Park answered. Rake leads a critical defense node. Attempts to intimidate or retaliate against him risk operational integrity. National security implications concentrated minds. Silence lengthened, then pencils resumed moving briskly. Park continued, recorded exchanges, dozens of witnesses, Whitford's private notes, suspicious financial trails around complaint handling, plus a demonstrable pattern of retaliation, selective enforcement, family targeting, cross-department pile-ons whenever citizens resisted. At least 15 instances of punitive behavior after complaints, she said. Chen's notes sharpened. Section 1983 conspiracy obvious. Municipal exposure likely. We're also seeing false reports, evidence fabrication, and possible theft of seized property, Park added. The scope broadened beyond one officer, toward colleagues, officials, and business allies who benefited. Timeline? Torres asked. We're ready now, Park replied. Rake's security triggers priority. Arrest packages are nearly complete. Pentagon coordination. Ongoing, Torres said. Ravenford's under enhanced posture. Personnel briefed. Off-base limits ready if required. Park nodded, understanding the shockwaves about to hit a town that let abuse breathe. Federal arrests of local police draw national cameras, more so with military angles. One more item, Park said. Mayor Frederick Cole and Chief Whitford request a meeting, offer full cooperation. Chen didn't blink. Too late for voluntary compliance. With systemic violations documented, DOJ must charge regardless. We'll take the meeting, briefing, not bargaining. They scheduled it for morning, time enough to finalize warrants, sync with base security, and prep prosecutors. Meanwhile, media heat rose, local leaks fueling regional coverage, national outlets discovering small town misconduct, colliding with defense readiness. Reporters pelted phones, Park routed inquiries to media relations. The story's chemistry, bias, abuse, military-civilian friction, corruption, proved combustible. Opinion writers framed oversight. Commentators argued community policing versus constitutional compliance. Crucially, visibility coaxed new voices. 14 fresh complainants called, never previously filing. Each added weight to the pattern column, strengthening necessity for federal intervention. One message in particular caught Park's attention immediately. Rebecca Martinez. She'd been slammed against her car 6 months earlier, complaint dismissed as unsubstantiated. Agent Park, I have documentation, medical records, notes, dates, Martinez said. I want to help, but I'm worried about retaliation. You'll have federal protection, Park answered. They interviewed that evening. 2 agents and a victim services coordinator. Martinez's account mirrored others. Baseless stop, illegal search, escalation after asserting rights. He kept saying I had a smart mouth, she said, as if knowledge equals disrespect. Most damaging for Whitford, the complaint handling. Chief told me procedures were followed, dashcam corrupted. My word versus an officer, Martinez said. I don't buy it. I've seen evidence vanish when it embarrasses power. Park's pen didn't pause. Martinez's testimony strengthened charges against Green and Whitford and supported the inevitability of a consent decree. The following morning, a call elevated everything further. Pentagon Security, Colonel Sarah Mitchell. From DIA, voice clipped, urgent. We've reviewed harassment's implications, Mitchell said. Rake commands operations vital to Northeastern Homeland Defense. Compromising his safety or effectiveness has wider security consequences. We're prepared to classify under counterterror authorities if necessary. That designation would multiply resources and attention, ensuring political urgency. What do you need? Park asked. Immediate arrests of those threatening Rake, federal protection for potentially targeted personnel, and temporary federal oversight of local policing. Park called Chen. Within 2 hours, arrest warrants were authorized for Green, Whitford, and 3 municipal collaborators who helped bury complaints. Dawn operations would prevent evidence destruction and retaliatory mischief. The choreography felt grimly familiar. As Park finalized plans, she considered Green's original miscalculation. He'd mistaken Rake for a forgettable outsider. Instead, he'd found a federal officer backed by institutions that treat threats to personnel as threats to national security. The quiet man with coffee possessed more effective power than all local officials combined, power disciplined by law, not ego. Tomorrow morning, Green would finally see what that authority looks like when turned toward accountability. The reckoning neared. At 6:47 a.m. then Wednesday, Green sipped coffee when the knock came. Firm, professional. FBI, warrant for your arrest. His cup slipped, scalding headlines destined to report his downfall. Confidence he'd worn like armor evaporated instantly. Through the peephole, 6 agents, vehicles bracketing the street. Not an interview, an operation. Officer Green, open up, hands visible. Choices collapsed into 2, surrender with dignity or resist and stack charges. He opened the door. Agent Noel Park stood centered, credentials clear, expression neutral but immovable. Officer Ethan Green, you're under arrest for federal civil rights violations, conspiracy to deprive rights, and interference with federal officers. Cuffs clicked with practiced impersonal efficiency. Miranda read cleanly, courtesies Green rarely extended. The walk to the vehicle matched his own preferred humiliations. Public, undeniable. Difference was integrity. These agents respected the Constitution he'd treated like an obstacle instead of a mandate. In the back seat, watching neighbors awaken to flashing lights, he grasped the magnitude of trouble he authored. 3 blocks away, another door opened, Chief Whitford's pre-dawn encounter with the federal morning he'd long feared. He'd drafted conciliatory talking points for a 9 o'clock cooperation meeting, irrelevant now. Chief Whitford, you're under arrest. Conspiracy to violate civil rights, obstruction, failure to address known misconduct, an agent announced. Whitford understood immediately evidence would be overwhelming. Career over, pension imperiled, reputation collapsing at 7 a.m. May I call my attorney? After booking, Park said, we've seized departmental records, systems, communications. Your cooperation may influence prosecutorial posture. He nodded, silence heavy with regret. By 8, 5 arrests were complete. Green, Whitford, 2 complicit officers, and a council member who smothered complaints. The arrests were step 1. At 8:15, Park called Mayor Cole with the announcement he dreaded: immediate federal oversight. Until further notice, all law enforcement activity operates under federal supervision, she said. Cole's world tilted. Oversight meant federal protocols, media saturation, and economic consequences unless trust could be rebuilt fast enough to reassure Ravenford's leadership. Agent Park, surely we can resolve this cooperatively, Cole said. We're committed to addressing individual misconduct. Mr. Mayor, we've documented 49 violations over 6 years and leadership concealment. This is institutional failure, she replied. It means rebuilding your department from the foundation. New leadership, outside review, constitutional protocols. We'll also examine other municipal units for corruption or rights violations. Cole convened an emergency council. By 10, every regional outlet blared headlines: corruption, civil rights abuse, a military angle. Newsrooms feasted. National reporters deployed quickly. The defining moment arrived at 2 o'clock, a press conference at Ravenford Base. Rake disliked publicity, but understood necessity, reassure the town, and signal expectations. In dress blues before flags and insignia, he spoke briefly, carefully. Good afternoon, I'm Colonel Marcus Rake, Commanding Officer, Ravenford Defense Installation. I'll address recent events involving local law enforcement and their treatment of military personnel. For 30-plus years, I've served where rights were aspirations, not guarantees. I've seen how unaccountable authority corrodes communities. What I experienced here mirrored behaviors from failed states, different uniforms, same contempt for constitutional limits. Today's federal action shows the system working. When local protection fails, federal responsibility engages. This wasn't about my rank, it's about citizenship. My rights were violated by people sworn to uphold the Constitution they breached. Every person Officer Green harassed deserved the same protection. My position gave me access. That access should belong to all Americans. Ravenford will keep supporting this region, partnering only with lawful, professional agencies that respect non-negotiable rights. 15 minutes, lasting impact. The narrative widened. From scandal to national conversation on civil rights enforcement and military-civilian trust. Importantly, Rake confirmed continued operations, conditional on constitutional compliance. The message was unmistakable: reform or risk prosperity. By night, consequences crystallized. Green faced decades in prison. His lawyer's advice: plead, cooperate, hope for leniency. Whitford's trajectory looked similar, with added disgrace of leadership failure. Cole spent evening calls learning the scale of required reform: total restructuring, multi-year oversight, mandatory training, compensation funds for victims. The deeper shift was cultural: rethinking power, accountability, and public safety. For years, residents tolerated Green's tactics as the price of order. Rake shattered that bargain. He demonstrated authority without accountability as weakness. Real strength is service to law. He used institutional power not to crush opponents, but to ensure systems functioned. The lesson landed on everyone except those too stubborn to learn. In America, no one sits above the law. The reckoning concluded, Green's intimidation era ended. A community began learning what policing looks like when badges serve rather than dominate, and oversight prevents rot, not pride. Dusk settled while agents logged evidence, interviewed witnesses, and assembled cases that promised justice many never expected. The quiet authority Rake showed at Murphy's was about to redefine an entire town's sense of power used properly. 6 months later, Murphy's looked the same: red vinyl, chrome, checkerboard, Clarissa on mornings now going on 9 years. Everything else felt different. The fear that once hovered around cruisers and uniforms had lifted noticeably. People asked questions, filed complaints, chatted casually. It wasn't instant. It wasn't easy. Federal oversight meant rebuilding from studs, constitutional law, de-escalation, cultural competence. Those who wouldn't meet standards, or who'd abetted cover-ups, moved on. The new department bore little resemblance to Whitford and Green's creation. Chief Andrea Williams, a seasoned former state captain, instituted body cams always on, tamper-proof dash cams, supervisor approvals for arrests, absent urgent danger, and independent civilian review for complaints. Initial pushback simmered. Old habits cling, but crime stayed level while complaints plummeted. Skeptics converted, conceding constitutional policing isn't softness, it's effectiveness. Mayor Cole survived, but announced he wouldn't seek re-election, focusing on repair. Repair worked. Ravenford expanded community programs under Rake, civic events, school partnerships, service projects. Federal contracts grew, operations widened, signaling trust. Rather than punishment, successful reform became proof the region merited greater responsibility. The community learned different lessons about rights and power. Rebecca Martinez became an advocate, testifying in Congress, training other towns, explaining how oversight protects people, especially where local accountability falters or is captured by convenience. What happened here isn't unique, she'd say. Misconduct thrives where challenging authority feels dangerous. Federal remedies exist if communities insist. Jerome Williams graduated with honors, scholarship in criminal justice, his thesis on constitutional policing widely cited. Badges don't make heroes, Jerome wrote. Behavior does. Real officers defend rights, serve communities, and understand authority flows from the people. The case became a model. Swift, effective, restorative enforcement in places overlooked for too long. Academies taught it as cautionary tale. Classes played Green Rake recordings, how not to police. Legislation followed, streamlining federal probes of misconduct in small jurisdictions where internal oversight had withered or grown tangled with politics. Businesses learned too. Some who once cheered toughness realized misconduct nearly crushed their economy. We needed competent constitutional policing, said restaurateur Tom Richardson. Safety and rights aren't opposites. They're the same promise, delivered properly. Schools added civics on rights, procedures, and oversight, arming kids with knowledge empowering lawful encounters. The idea, prevention through understanding, so future abuse finds fewer shadows. At the center, Rake kept leading quietly at Ravenford. He still came Tuesdays. Same stool, paper, generous tip. Now, though, welcome replaced wary politeness. Conversations felt natural. Base updates, town politics, weather, without the tension that once poisoned military-civilian interactions here. At 8:30, Chief Williams entered for coffee. The base commander and police chief chatting openly had become emblematic. Two institutions coordinating, each respecting the other's constraints, both committed to rights and safety without compromises. "Morning, Marcus," Williams said, taking the neighboring stool. "Quarterly exercise?" "Smooth, Andrea," he answered. "Your officers' coordination has been excellent. Professionalism makes interagency work easy." They discussed logistics, community events, and shared challenges. Other patrons listened with interest, not suspicion. Coordination now felt protective, not oppressive. As Rake left, he thought back to the first Tuesday. the attempted intimidation that accidentally began a transformation few would have predicted. Green served 12 years for civil rights violations, conspiracy, obstruction, appeals denied, support network collapsed. His name became shorthand for what to prevent. Whitford received less time for cooperation, pension diverted toward compensating victims. Others who colluded received sentences scaled to involvement, banned from law enforcement, required to serve with civil rights groups. Rake took no pleasure in punishments. What mattered? Systems functioned, harms acknowledged, guardrails installed to shield tomorrow's neighbors. Real security isn't intimidation, it's universal protection. Passing the spot where Green first demanded ID, Rake saw a patrol car, Officer Maria Santiago's. Years ago, Green detained her suspiciously, waiting post-hospital shift. Now she wore the badge. She'd graduated top of her academy class, community policing track, cultural competence focus. Her hiring represented personal renewal and institutional reform. A department that once targeted her now trusted her to uphold constitutional service. The symbolism was unmistakable. Where difference once triggered suspicion, it now signaled strength. Where leadership buried misconduct, oversight prevented it. Where systems protected abusers, accountability protected victims. Not perfection, progress with teeth. Policing stayed difficult. Federal oversight felt heavy. Reform cost money. But the bond between authority and accountability was repaired, ensuring future problems would meet processes, not darkness. That alone changed daily life more than speeches. Driving toward Ravenford, Rake passed signs rebranded by lessons learned. Businesses touted constitutional policing support. Civic groups emphasized rights education. Language revealed values, strength through fairness, safety through legitimacy, service through restraint. Briefing time, routine updates, regional threats, personnel, civilian coordination, also reports on expanded community programs, school collaborations, cultural events, military families and locals meeting as neighbors, building the durable trust missions need. Ravenford, once insulated, now knit into community fabric, mutually reinforcing resilience. Captain Monroe concluded with something unimaginable months earlier. Sir, 12 installations requested our engagement protocols. They're studying our model for replication. Rake nodded. Their hard-won blueprint had value beyond county lines. Reform proved moral and operational. Respectful policing increases safety. Legitimacy reduces friction. Prepare a comprehensive report, include civilian feedback. If useful, share broadly, he said. As the meeting ended, Rake reflected. A coffee shop confrontation became proof that constitutional principles outlast corruption, that federal oversight can restore rather than ruin, and that authority's worth is measured by service, never domination. Each Tuesday at Murphy's, he remembered how quiet resolve resisted bluster and reshaped a town's expectations of law. The takeaway felt simple. Real power safeguards rights. It doesn't trample them. Anything less is merely fear in uniform. Jerome mentored younger students. Martinez trained municipalities. Chief Williams published policy updates. Cole shepherded budgets through oversight. Monroe iterated drills. Park debriefed agents. Progress isn't a headline. It's a routine delivered, audited, improved. Some grumbled about change. Most appreciated calmer streets and fairer treatment. The system felt less mysterious, more accountable. People filed complaints without dread. Officers viewed cameras as shields for truth, not threats to pride. Rake still tipped 20%, still thanked Clarissa with that faint drawl. She smiled easier now, knowing who he was and what his restraint had accomplished. Quiet strength steering institutions toward their better selves. In the federal facility, Green faced paperwork heavier than handcuffs. Accountability travels slow, then arrives all at once. He finally understood that badges don't grant exceptions, they impose obligations. He'd treated duty like leverage and lost. Whitford spoke softly at sentencing, regret plain. I thought I was protecting the department. Protection without transparency is rot. He'd learned too late that sunlight is medicine, paperwork is memory, and courage often looks administrative. Across town, a bulletin board listed community police dialogues, know your rights sessions, ride-alongs. Kids practiced how to ask for badge numbers politely. Officers practiced how to answer calmly. Normal felt different now, lighter, safer, sturdier. Some nights, wind rattled the diner's windows. Clarissa refilled mugs, listening to stories about bases, schools, taxes, music. The town's heartbeat sounded ordinary again, the extraordinary tucked into policies, training schedules, and case law. Agents boxed files, transcripts, recordings, exhibits. Justice is paperwork plus will. Victims received letters acknowledging harm and steps taken, not perfect, better, and better, repeated, becomes culture. That's how communities heal without forgetting. Rake walked out under a sky the color of aluminum. He preferred engineering to grandstanding, systems tuned, redundancies in place, human factors humbled. Leadership is maintenance, boring, relentless, essential. He excelled at boring, relentless, essential. Half a year after dawn raids, Murphy's looked unchanged. But their story, once whispered, now trained cadets, briefed commanders, informed legislation. The town learned power isn't noise, it's restraint, accountability, and a willingness to be measured. Red stools, checkerboard floors, coffee steam fogging glass, Clarissa's laugh, these remained. What shifted was posture, heads up, shoulders lowered. Authority had edges but not fangs. People practiced being citizens, not subjects again. Reform began feeling routine. Oversight meetings, dashboard metrics, independent audits. Metrics bored some people. That boredom was freedom. Drama had ceded to process, and process done right quietly guards what communities love about home. Chief Williams posted quarterly stats. Complaints down, clearance rates steady, use of force incidents rare and reviewed thoroughly. She took questions in public, answered without spin, and walked Main Street without entourage. Respect replaced fear. Council appropriated funds for training and independent review rather than armored vanity. Businesses contributed to scholarship programs named for rights, not toughness. Symbols changed, so did incentives. That's how progress stops backsliding. Schools' civics nights filled the auditorium. Parents asked about searches. Students debated probable cause. Officers explained policy and apologized for the past. Accountability, it turned out, wasn't scary. It made conversations honest. On Tuesdays, Rick sometimes fielded questions about base life from kids spinning on stools. He said missions protect families they'd never meet. He never glamorized. He talked about checklists, teams, and promises kept quietly. Cole attended fewer press conferences and more budget workshops. He learned federal forms like a second language. Humility sharpened his effectiveness. He'd missed warning signs. Now he posted them himself, in procedures and calendars. Monroe refined coordination drills, dispatch perimeters, handoffs, so crises met choreography, not improvisation. Boring wins, she'd say, and everyone nodded. They had seen what excitement brings. Broken norms, bad headlines, expensive repairs. Martinez's nonprofit grew. Hotlines, clinics, training libraries. She smiled rarely at cameras, often at clients. Survivors taught classes. Dignity returned. The calendar filled. So did the donation jar. Justice budgets itself when measurable. Jerome interned with the oversight board, auditing a use of force review. He found a discrepancy and flagged it. The chief thanked him publicly. That applause was small but powerful. Incentives were changing in plain sight. Park debriefed her team. What worked, what to replicate, what to avoid. She logged lessons in a memo likely read by more attorneys than agents. That's okay. Memos become doctrine. Doctrine becomes durable protection. Torres shipped a summary to other bases, emphasizing early liaison, rapid posture shifts, community transparency. Military security thrives when neighbors feel informed, not surveilled. Partnerships aren't charity. their architecture, interlocking beams sharing load. At Murphy's, Clarissa poured Rake another cup. Same tip, she teased. Same tip, he grinned. Rituals matter. So does stubborn kindness. People recalibrated around those, trusting repetition to teach what speeches can't. A tourist asked about the famous incident. Daniel, older now, college-bound, shrugged. We fixed stuff, he said. Still fixing. He liked that answer. It refused mythology while respecting the grind required to deserve normalcy. Local headlines turned to school sports, zoning disputes, weather advisories. The absence of scandal became newsworthy in its own quiet way. Boredom, reclaimed as a civic luxury. People paid taxes and exhaled. Every so often, someone muttered nostalgia for tough policing. Then a neighbor reminded them who paid the price. Memory kept doors wedged open, not vengeance, maintenance. The town learned to maintain instead of mythologize. Sunlight angled across the diner. Rake checked his watch. Duty called. He settled his bill, thanked Clarissa, nodded to Williams, and stepped into air that no longer hummed with dread, just ordinary Tuesday promise. On Main, a cruiser idled lawfully at a crosswalk. Officer Santiago waved a stroller through, then wrote a report, body cam blinking, policy thick in her pocket. She looked proud. She looked unafraid. Progress visible. Rake drove past banners for a joint safety fair, Ravenford booths beside community tables, civics games, de-escalation demos, music, barbecue, not optics, he thought. Habits. Habits outlive leaders, and weather storms without complaint. At base, the day's rhythm resumed. Briefings, maintenance, drills, messages, quiet systems doing big work. Rake liked it that way. Institutions don't need to be loud to be strong. They need to be dependable. He remembered Green's first ID demand, how volume pretended to be authority. Volume fades, paper trails don't. Every signature since then had been his answer, a steady stack of commitments no bully could outshout. In town, a poster read, Know Your Rights Night, hosted by Civilian Oversight Board, Police Department, Ravenford Base. The logos sat side by side like puzzle pieces that finally found where they always belonged. Rake signed a requisition, initialed a training schedule, approved a leave request. Leadership measured by checkboxes, not spotlights. He preferred it. He'd seen countries mistake swagger for stability. He knew better. Williams walked a beat downtown weekly. She liked hearing from shopkeepers before problems needed memos. One said, feels calmer now. She smiled. Calm is a policy outcome. It means you're doing boring right. Cole visited the Academy's graduation, clapped for Santiago as class speaker. We are guardians, not rulers, she said. He wrote it down, underlined twice, and taped it inside his desk drawer afterward. Monroe completed an after-action review of the quarter's drills. She flagged a communications lag and corrected it before anyone noticed. Prevented disasters rarely trend. She slept better anyway. Success is invisible and cumulative. Park's casework shifted to another town's familiar pattern. Startlingly similar numbers, depressingly similar excuses. She opened a new file, then smiled at an email. Thanks for the template. Replication, the sincerest form of progress. Rake paused at a window overlooking the airfield. A cargo plane lifted, wheels tucking cleanly. Elegant, dependable, like good policy. Lift achieved through checklists, timing, discipline. He whispered, stay boring, then returned to work. Clarissa refilled Mr. Peterson's mug. 9-letter turning point? He asked. Conversion, she suggested. He considered, grinned, penciled it in. Across the diner, someone laughed without flinching when a cruiser rolled by outside. Jerome visited his old high school, speaking to students about rights and responsibility. Courage isn't volume, he said. It's patience plus documentation. The auditorium clapped. Somewhere, a future chief took notes carefully. Martinez mailed a check to a scholarship named for a teenager whose complaint changed a precinct across the state. She wrote, for books, in the memo line, and hoped the kid bought coffee too. Cole read monthly oversight reports like scripture, carefully, consistently. He circled good trends, flagged backslides and asked better questions. He'd learned that showing up late costs more than showing up always. Santiago trained rookies on stop protocols. "Here's the question," she said. "Are we proving power or protecting rights?" They nodded, wrote it down. She remembered her own night on a bench and smiled. Rake ended the day signing a commendation for a sergeant who corrected a mistake before it multiplied. He meant every word. Accountability without punishment is culture building. He believed in that kind of praise. Williams walked into Murphy's, nodded at Clarissa, and caught her reflection smiling back. "Feels different," Clarissa said. "Feels right," Williams answered. Neither speechy nor sentimental, just relief lined with vigilance and routines. Park closed the green case file with a final memo. She didn't celebrate. She archived. Wins belong in systems, not trophies. Systems remember. Trophies collect dust. She preferred memory that guides operations. Monroe emailed Rake the draft of their engagement playbook, clear, modular, replicable. He made 3 edits, all commas, and signed. Words matter when they govern conduct. Commas matter when clarity decides behavior. Torres forwarded base feedback from another state. "Adopted your framework. Early indicators positive." He allowed himself a grin. Military culture loves checklists. Now they had one for neighbors too. Sturdy, tested, humane. Jerome's thesis won an award. He texted Clarissa a photo from campus. She printed it and taped it to the espresso machine. "Look at him," she told customers. "That's our kid right there." A rain shower speckled Maine. People hustled without hunching when a cruiser eased by. Reflexes change last. Theirs finally had. That's how you know culture moved, from fear to expectation to ordinary. Rake's calendar pinged. "Tuesday coffee." He smiled, shut the laptop, and stood. The work would still be there afterward. It always is. The work is why quiet mornings matter and remain worth guarding. He passed a bulletin board. Civics night. Ask anything. He'd send an officer and a civilian liaison. Knowledge dissolves paranoia. Paranoia feeds bullies. He'd seen both. He knew which one wins longer. The bell over Murphy's door chimed. "Morning, Colonel," Clarissa said. "Morning," Rake replied. She poured. He thanked her. Ordinary words, extraordinary repair, stitched together by policy, patience, and people choosing process over theater. If this story stirred you even a little, consider subscribing. We're building a home for voices once ignored. Every new subscriber helps keep these hard-won lessons alive, audible, and anchored in everyday American life. Lesson: real power protects, it doesn't bully. Many of us who remember rotary phones and black and white news know this truth. Authority without accountability always turns mean. In that little diner, the steam from the coffee rose like a flare, and a small-town badge tried to make fear pass for order. But the quiet man, an old soldier with 3 decades of service, answered with steadiness, paperwork, and the Constitution. The reckoning that followed wasn't loud, it was lawful. For those of us 65 and up, the lesson is plain as daylight savings. Real power protects neighbors, respects rights, and writes everything down. Bullies shout, institutions endure. Friends, if this story stirred something in you, tell me, where have you seen the difference between swagger and service in your own town? Do you believe lasting safety comes from tougher talk or tighter guardrails, transparent policies, and leaders who sign their names to reforms you can measure? Share a memory from your lifetime, good or bad, when accountability actually changed behavior on your block, at a school, or in City Hall. I read every comment. Please like this video, subscribe to my YouTube channel, and pass it along so more neighbors, especially our grandkids, can learn how calm, steady justice really works.